The June 2025 conflict between Israel and Iran was only a prelude. When the Iranian people rose up in massive numbers in early 2026 to protest economic collapse and political repression, the regime responded with total force. Thousands were killed, and the country went dark as the government crushed the movement. While that crackdown was still underway, U.S. President Donald Trump sent a public message to the protesters. Help is on the way. The United States moved Carrier Strike Group 3, led by the USS Abraham Lincoln, into the Middle East. With diplomatic talks over Iran's nuclear and missile programs entirely collapsed, the military buildup signaled an imminent defensive. On February 28th, the U.S. and Israel initiated Operations Epic Fury and Roaring Lion. Over the course of a single day, the coalition launched roughly 900 airstrikes. They systematically targeted and dismantled Iran's remaining air defenses, which were already heavily degraded from the previous year's clashes. The strikes deliberately targeted the highest levels of Iranian leadership. In hours, the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the defense minister were all killed. The highest rungs of Iran's political and military command structure were wiped out. By any conventional military standard, the opening day of the war was a staggering tactical success. The coalition controlled the skies, the targets were destroyed, and the Iranian state appeared entirely leaderless and vulnerable. Yet the reality that followed tells a different story. Instead of an immediate surrender or a regime collapse, the Middle East is currently caught in a spiraling escalation. Global energy markets are in a state of panic, and the United States finds itself managing the fallout almost entirely alone. This schematic breaks down the three stated objectives of the U.S. and Israeli campaign. To evaluate the true outcome of this war, we have to run a strategic audit against these specific goals: neutralizing Iran's military threat, eliminating its capacity to develop nuclear weapons, and forcing a change in the regime. When we measure the massive physical destruction in Iran against these exact metrics, the tactical success of the opening airstrikes begins to look entirely different. The first goal, neutralizing the military threat, failed because it relied on an outdated understanding of the enemy. The IRGC operates on a highly decentralized command structure. Even with their top generals dead, regional commanders retain the authority and the autonomy to direct forces and launch attacks on their own. Within hours of the American and Israeli strikes, these autonomous commanders launched Operation True Promise 4. They flooded the region with low-cost, disposable drone swarms and surviving ballistic missiles, targeting Israel, American bases, and the capital cities of Gulf allies. The math of this response heavily favors Iran. Gulf nations are forced to use highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles to shoot down drones that cost a few $1,000s to build. To manage this financially draining reality, Ukraine, a country with vast experience in cheap drone interception, sent military specialists to the Gulf to help mitigate the threat. The relentless volume of these attacks also took a toll on premium hardware. American AN/TPY-2 radar systems sustained heavy damage. Most notably, on March 19th, the U.S. command confirmed an F-35 fighter jet was hit, the first recorded instance of this advanced aircraft sustaining combat damage. The traditional method of winning a war by cutting off the head of the snake does not work when the enemy's military power is distributed across hundreds of cheap, autonomous, and mobile launch sites. Unable to match the coalition in the air, Iran expanded the geography of the war by executing its ultimate asymmetric threat. They declared the Strait of Hormuz closed to commercial shipping. This map illustrates exactly why that decision paralyzed the global economy. Roughly 20% of all the world's seaborne oil must pass through this single geographic bottleneck to reach the open ocean. Iran deployed coastal missile batteries, vast naval mine networks, and swarms of fast attack boats, severing the route and making transit physically impossible for commercial tankers. The economic reaction was immediate. Major shipping conglomerates suspended all transit through the strait. Oil exports from the region dropped by 60%, and global crude prices spiked above $120 a barrel, triggering an energy crisis across Europe and the United States. The U.S. attempted to organize a multinational task force to clear mines and escort the tankers, but NATO allies refused to participate, essentially declaring it not our war. The United States was left entirely isolated in its attempt to reopen the corridor. By holding the global energy supply hostage, Iran successfully neutralized America's military superiority. They proved that regional geographic leverage can effectively paralyze a global superpower. This brings us to the final two objectives: eliminating the nuclear program and forcing regime change. During the airstrikes, the coalition successfully bombed the surfaced entrances to facilities at Natanz and Isfahan. However, the estimated 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium remains securely buried underground. To permanently verify the destruction of those nuclear assets and to completely root out the millions of armed supporters tied to the IRGC, airstrikes are insufficient. It requires a massive foreign ground invasion. The geography of Iran prevents exactly that. To the north and east, neighboring countries will not allow their borders to be used as staging grounds. To the west lies the jagged, impassable terrain of the Zagros Mountains, and to the south, an amphibious landing would face relentless missile barrages and brutally vast deserts. The country's topography effectively acts as an impenetrable shield. It renders a conventional, large-scale ground invasion logistically impossible, taking forced regime change completely off the table. Today, the clerical regime continues to govern. Many of its original leaders are dead, but the ideology, the bureaucratic system, and the newly appointed supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, remain firmly in control. The physical state of the country is devastated. It will take Iran decades to rebuild its civilian and military infrastructure. Yet its nuclear material is untouched, and its capacity to manufacture cheap, effective weapons of asymmetric warfare survived the initial onslaught. Reviewing the strategic audit, the coalition failed to topple the government. They failed to protect the infrastructure of their Gulf allies, and they failed to secure the most critical maritime trade route in the world. The bombardment inflicted immense pain, but it did not achieve its geopolitical aims. The war clearly outlined the strict limits of conventional military strikes, leaving a crippled but deeply dangerous Iranian state intact. In late February 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operations Epic Fury and Roaring Lion. On the very first day of the war, the coalition executed approximately 900 airstrikes across Iranian territory. The initial onslaught completely neutralized Iran's remaining air defense networks. It also decapitated the nation's political and military command structure, killing the defense minister, top generals, and the supreme leader himself, Ayatollah Khamenei. But the scale of the bombardment came with a severe civilian toll. An intelligence failure led American forces to strike the Minob Girls' School, believed to be an outdated military facility, killing more than 170 children. Despite the casualties, the coalition believed this overwhelming show of force would instantly break the Iranian state. President Donald Trump and military planners assumed the shock of losing their central leadership would collapse the regime overnight. Obliterating a nation's conventional military infrastructure creates a dangerous illusion. Vaporizing radar dishes and command bunkers only wins a conventional conflict, masking the hard truth that a grueling, asymmetric war has only just begun. Even with their top commanders dead, the Iranian military did not freeze. They immediately pivoted to a highly decentralized command structure, empowering regional leaders to continue operations independently of the capital. Instead of fighting jet to jet, Iran relied on massive cost imposition. They expanded the geography of the war by launching vast swarms of cheap, disposable drones, sometimes 50 to 100 at a time, directly at the neighboring Gulf monarchies. This forced the U.S. and its allies into a mathematically ruinous position. Firing a highly advanced 7-figure interceptor missile to shoot down a $20,000 drone drains a defense budget incredibly fast. To stop the financial bleeding, the Gulf states had to look outward. Ukrainian military specialists soon arrived in the region, bringing real-world combat experience and cheap drone interceptor technology to help mitigate the swarm threat. Complete air supremacy can erase physical military assets, but it struggles against decentralized, asymmetric tactics. An adversary utilizing highly dispersed, low-cost weapons can continually exhaust a technologically superior force. Iran then pulled its most devastating economic lever, blockading the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway is an absolute bottleneck for global energy, handling roughly 20% of the world's seaborne oil. The blockade immediately sent global oil prices soaring past $120 a barrel. The energy crisis became so severe that the United States temporarily suspended its embargo on Russian oil, while simultaneously attempting slow, highly dangerous naval mine-clearing operations entirely alone. As the economic pressure mounted, all geopolitical red lines dissolved. Both sides began actively bombing each other's coastal energy infrastructure, taking out vital gas fields and highly explosive liquefied natural gas facilities. The coalition's second major objective was eliminating Iran's nuclear program. This image shows the surface-level layout of an Iranian nuclear site. American bombers successfully destroyed entrance points at Natanz and Isfahan, but deep beneath that surface terrain, core infrastructure remains intact. Iran retains enough enriched uranium for 10 nuclear bombs, buried completely beyond conventional airstrikes. Total dominance of the skies falls short if it cannot neutralize deeply buried nuclear threats or secure international shipping lanes against a relentless asymmetric blockade. The final objective of the campaign was regime change. While coalition strikes eliminated senior clerical figures like Ali Larijani, the governing system itself, backed by the heavily armed Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, stayed firmly in power. The coalition banked on a spontaneous civilian uprising or an internal ethnic insurgency to finish the job. But with the Revolutionary Guard actively threatening violent crackdowns, a mass revolt simply never materialized. Without an internal collapse doing the heavy lifting, the only remaining method to force a change in government and actually secure the underground nuclear sites is a catastrophic foreign ground invasion. Iran's physical geography makes an invasion nearly impossible. A northern or eastern assault is blocked by politically hostile borders, while the west is walled off by the impenetrable topography of the Zagros Mountains. The final alternative is a southern amphibious landing from the Persian Gulf. Moving a ground RE into this brutal, arid environment while under constant missile and drone fire would turn any offensive into an immediate, devastating meat grinder. When overwhelming firepower fails to keep global trade routes open, it fails to dismantle a nuclear program, and fails to unseat a hostile government, a superpower loses its aura of invincibility. It reveals a stark reality. Securing a string of tactical victories can still result in a massive strategic failure.